Hey folks, welcome to That Photo Feeling. I'm your host, Andy McSweeney. How do you feel about your photography? Good to great to awesome, I hope, or at least on its way there, and let's see what today's show can do for that. Today is a nice interview little moment too with my special guest, Mr. Marc Silver. He is a photographer, videographer, photography instructor, and photo author of such books as Advancing Your Photography. And I sat down with him more than a little while ago to have a chat about all of that. How he felt about his photography, how he feels about photography instructors and the best way to get some photo learning going. And of course, among other things, his story in photography, as I like to ask my guests here. We don't just nerd out, even though we do that too, including with Marc. All right, let's get straight to it. I'll be back at the end of the chit-chat with my own chit-chat on the solo way, in case anyone's interested. What's up, what's new? One little thing before we do get to it, though. My sincerest and deepest apologies to Marc for such a long delay in getting this broadcast out. We did this way back in like late spring, and here we are almost Halloween. And because I've not had my eye on the ball with the podcast between the breaks, between the other stuff, well, what can I say? It slipped. Marc, you're awesome for waiting and not bugging me. And I hope you all enjoy this chat as much as I did with Marc. Let's get to it.
The most positive thing that came out of COVID is everybody got used to doing long distance teaching and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that must have changed your world also, I'm guessing, over the last year and a half. Have you done a lot of remote?
Completely. Everything changed. Yeah. I was doing a lot of video production, which came to a screeching halt in COVID. I mean, there was nobody there to video anymore. And then, so I had to do a major pivot in my business, mainly to online education and consulting. So that's actually become now the bulk of what I do is those two things. In fact, that's all I'm doing. I'm not even reaching out for commercial video work at this point. Maybe it'll come back. We'll see.
Really? So you've picked up enough work as an educator online even over the last year, and it's something you've been doing for a while, isn't it?
I've been doing it for a long time. So I just really focused in on it. And I was a consultant in Silicon Valley for years and years and years, and then transitioned back into photography as another career. And but I brought the consulting business back to life because you can do that remotely.
Just for photography, or also the IT side?
Oh no, any kind of business, management consulting for and a variety of different businesses.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. In fact, I'm not working with any photographers. It's a completely different world at this point. I'm going to probably take on a few, but these are mainly small business people.
Oh, cool. What sort of fields? In case you haven't guessed, we've started the interview.
Okay. I work, listen, I did a project for Sony. I've done a lot of projects for rather large Silicon Valley companies. I've also worked with healthcare. Basically I help them get organized. The thing that you find, and this is true with photographers as well, they know their craft and they know their trade, but they don't necessarily know the tools of organization. How to, human resources, who to hire, who not to hire, how to train these people, how to team building, how do you put a good team together? How do you keep a team working together? And those are specific skills that you certainly don't learn those in art school.
If anything, that's the last place it sounds like you'll learn it, unfortunately, not to diss the institution. And yeah, a lot of photographers don't get the business end of things, and that's where the magic is maybe not made, but where it's sustained, isn't it?
Yeah, you take somebody like we were talking about Peter Hurley, he's just been really smart about creating his business. I mean, he's got two really strong models. One is his own photography, but then he's created the headshot crew, and that's just huge as well. And he's very humble about it. When I've talked to him about it, he's sort of like, well, I almost just fell into it. But he's pretty smart, and he has a lot of business sense. But this is the key thing. I mean, a case study is really interesting. Two photographers, basically at the same time period. One was Ansel Adams, and the other is Edward Weston. And they lived within a few miles of each other. And they were both very well known at that time as pretty major photographers. However, if you walk down the street today and ask people, hey, do you know who Ansel Adams is? Most people will say, oh yeah, he's that guy who has all those pictures of mountains and Yosemite and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. They'll at least know that, right? Oh, I've seen him on a t-shirt. I've seen him on calendars. Yeah, he's that photographer, right? And you said, okay, cool. So do you know who Edward Weston is? Who? Yeah. I mean, we know who Edward Weston is because he's an iconic photographer of our era. Mm. But the difference between these two guys, they're both outstanding photographers, completely different. But why did one make it so far and become such a major part of photography and the other one kind of get left behind? It's because when Ansel Adams was giving a talk at Harvard University, and his marketing was just kind of a homegrown kind of thing at that point. He was doing moderately well, I think, doing okay, doing a lot of commercial work too, by the way. Not everybody realizes that Ansel Adams did a lot of commercial work that you will never know that he did it.
Absolutely.
He supported himself with that because there was no big sign underneath that said, hey, this photograph for Standard Oil was done by Ansel Adams. It just went into their brochure or whatever. But this guy came up to him and said, who's doing your marketing? And Ansel's like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what he said exactly, but it was kind of like, we just kind of do it ourselves. And he says, well, listen, you need somebody to help you with your marketing. I want to be your marketing guy. And he took over and basically made Ansel a household word. And nobody did that for Edward Weston. So he's kind of drifted into, amongst photographers, we know who he is, but the common public person doesn't know. And this is why, if you're pursuing photography as a career, you do need to have some grounding. You need to know how to market yourself. You need to know how to get organized. I'm not doing an advertisement for myself as a consultant, but I'm just saying, why it's so important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a great point to launch off on. I mean, especially myself, and certainly over the interview, I'm going to refer to some of my experiences. That's always why I call these things chats more than interviews. It's bouncing back and forth. But I'm, for example, really happy that the wife does the accounting, so I can go out and be the pretty face of the business, if you will.
There you go.
I can handle putting it all on paper and all that sort of thing. But given the chance, I'd rather delegate that time, if nothing else, to her. Get her to handle that, and then I can spend those man hours going out and working my photography tour, for example. Yeah. Where do you think, I mean, even if it's just accounting, but I guess there's marketing, there's logistics and such. Where do you think most photographers fail, aside from actually taking the photo?
Well, every organization of any size, whether it's one person or a million people, you could take any business and you can analyze it based on it divides into 7 different divisions. And in my books, I talk about and create this one here, and also my book, Advancing Your Photography, I talk about the 5 stages of photography. And it's really helpful to divide these things up because you can see where things break down. But real briefly, you have an executive division where you, as the CEO of your own company, again, it could have one person in it, but you still have to wear that hat of what is your mission? What are you doing? Where are you going with this thing? You then have your hiring and human resources is another division. If you're hiring anybody, you've got to make sure you hire the right person. You've got to give them the right instructions so they do what you want. you're obviously involved in selling your work or selling your products. That's another division. Accounting is another division. And the fourth division is the one where most people just do all their work, and that's where you're actually producing stuff. But if you don't have all those other divisions lining up and helping that production, it can get bogged down. The fifth division is where you do quality control. You definitely need to have quality control of your own work. If for some reason something gets out that isn't right, I've had that happen, unfortunately, with things I don't control, like my books. I've had mistakes in the printing, and I go, "What happened here? Why is this?" It drives me crazy.
Oh, I can relate, brother.
Oh, it's the worst thing as a creative. And, I got to jump all over it. And then, because my name is on the book, right? They think Marc Silver screwed this printing up. Well, okay, he did, even if he didn't know about it. So I have to quickly get quality control in, get this thing reeled back in. And then the sixth area is basically, I guess you call business development. So those 7 divisions, where most, I guess, people fall down is they don't realize that they have to span those 7 things. Even if it's just an hour a week on one of those hats, you can't skip them. Like if you're hiring a crew, that's your human resources. You better know you're hiring the right people, even if it's a one-day shoot.
Absolutely.
Man, I've made that mistake only once. I hired a guy. This is the very beginning of my show, Advancing Your Photography. I was not a video guy. I was still a photographer. I didn't know anything about video. So I hired this guy to do the camera work. With my first interview was with Chase Jarvis, pretty high profile guy, right?
I saw you had a chat with him. I'm jealous too.
Yeah, I had a bunch of them, but my very first one, listen to this, Andy. Very first one, I set it up in San Francisco. He was in town. He was already a big name by then. That was 2008. So I hire this guy. I look at enough of his work to think, okay, he knows what he's doing. We go out in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco and shoot. I do the whole interview. We do B-roll. I think everything is great. A day or two goes by. I don't hear anything from him, which is always a little bit disconcerting. Like, why isn't he telling me how this? So I said, hey, how does the footage look? And he goes, the B-roll looks great. Oh. Okay, you don't want to hear that, because that means B-roll, for those who don't know, that's your auxiliary footage. That's the stuff, shooting the stuff around the main footage, which you can consider A-roll. The main footage is my interview with Chase Jarvis. And he said, well, we had a little focus problem. What do you mean focus problem? Well, I set it on autofocus, and the camera focused on the trees behind you, and you guys are slightly out of focus. Okay, I'm going to shoot an interview with Chase Jarvis about photography and have the interview be out of focus. No.
That doesn't work, especially in our world. Yeah, we're too exact for that. Yeah.
So that was my first lesson. Don't hire somebody you don't know what their work really looks like, and you better check it yourself. Fortunately, what Chase did is I confided in him, and he said, well, come up to Seattle and we'll just reshoot it. And that was very generous of him to not just say, Mark, no. If you don't know how to get your camera guy to focus. Fortunately, he said he had just had the same experience recently. So he had some empathy for me. But there's an example of not hiring the right person, not training them properly,
Yeah.
You can step in a big hole there and get messed up.
Yeah, that's definitely critical. And it's funny you mentioned that. We were talking before air about switching. I was switching from Skype. Part of what Skype does to me sometimes is it's done it 3 times and it sucks. I mean, luckily it hasn't been too busy people like Peter, Mr. Hurley, for example. But it only recorded my side of the interview.
I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that.
Yeah, that
Yeah, I
happened to
didn't
me.
know if it was something going on with me or it was actually in the recording. 'Cause wait a
Which
minute,
one
I'm
was
not hearing
that?
Peter.
No, I shouldn't
Did,
have broadcast them, but it's happened, and then I've had to re-record. Maybe
oh,
you've heard it
okay.
through the grapevine that Andy screwed up an interview.
Uh, maybe. Anyway, I know how that is. That's
Yeah.
devastating because you can't have one side of an interview, right?
Well, yeah, but that's, it leads to the greater point that I was going to say that and Chase knew and all these people knew that in this world, photography or otherwise, this is just going to happen. There's the humanity of it all, and you throw a bunch of
Yes.
electronics on. I'm staring at
Oh,
least four major pieces of technology just to record this, not to mention the internet that was built in between.
yes.
In our world, we have a little bit of that friendly give and take. I guess as a
So true.
question to bounce off of that, what do you tell the client when it goes wrong? Have you had that situation where something's come
I'm
up
going to
or
knock on wood. I've never failed at a project. I came close. And yeah, it's even when I came close, basically I said, I'm sorry, we're going to have to reshoot this. And in this case, this is an interesting one. This is many years ago, and the client said, or actually, it wasn't the client; it was the PR guy who had hired us for his client. And he said, "Go ahead and shoot it in standard definition. It doesn't need to be HD." Now, nowadays we don't even, you don't shoot in standard definition,
yeah.
but back then, you'd make these choices, and I thought, oh, okay, cool. Well, that turned out to be bad advice. Don't always listen to what the client tells you. Do what you know is best, right? If they say, Mark, you only need to shoot with one camera on this one, I take two. I'm sorry, I will have two cameras there because if something goes wrong with that one camera or I need to cut, I have no backup. So I've learned the hard way. I listen to what the client wants and then I make up my mind. So in that case, I almost blew what turned into a six-figure job
I see.
because we shot it in standard definition and then it turned out later they did want HD. Well, fortunately, we could, in post-production, we could just expand the frame.
Right.
We had that, but it took us a while to figure that out. And it was like, whoa, okay, thank goodness. But I told him before we had gotten that solution, I said, I'm sorry, we're going to have to reshoot. And his email came back, no reshoot. I went, okay, I got to figure this out.
I'm gonna have to make this work. Yeah.
Make it work. And the thing here, Andy, as we all know, you're right, things do go wrong. Audio recorders break. I gave you that example of the guy focusing on the background. There was no way to salvage that, though. That had to be reshot.
Yeah.
But when you're going to an important shoot, you just have to have a lot of backups. You really do.
Basically, that's what it comes down to. I have
Yeah,
extra backups even for the technology that we're recording, an emergency webcam that I can switch over if the battery dies on the
exactly.
Fuji. Yeah, it's that mindset I think you have to have just by nature. And
Yeah.
and maybe I guess this is the point also where since you've been taking photos for 50 years, and I'm no spring chicken, so I remember film time too. Uh, I guess to connect the two, I mean, can you remind the kids out there what it was like when we had to think back up with film, and
Oh
I
boy.
suppose where you found the biggest challenge always was, just to pick at that bone.
Well, with digital, you have a lot of latitude if you're shooting in RAW and you really underexpose. If you overexpose and you blow out your highlights, that's it. You can't really do anything about that, whether it's film or digital. That's why I always tell people always expose for the highlights because once those are gone, those are gone. You're not going to get it back. It's not going to be there. And that's true with film or digital. But in film, your latitude for error was much narrower because you didn't have a raw file that you could go, okay, I'm going to open up the shadows. I'm going to bring the highlights down. I got my histogram here. I'm going to, you didn't have that latitude. You have some latitude, but you really have to work at it, and you have to work at it really hard in the darkroom. Case in point, Ansel Adams. I have a film of this. It's pretty amazing. He shot this, one of his most iconic photographs, called Moonrise over Hernandez, New Mexico. And it's the moon coming up over this graveyard in New Mexico. And he had lost his light meter, could not find it. And he was shooting with a very large format camera, bigger than this one here, 8x10. And he put the plate in, exposed it based on he did a mental calculation of what the exposure had to be, but it was underexposed by quite a bit. And he turned the plate around to make another exposure, and the light was gone. So this film was very underexposed, and he had to go back to the darkroom and really manipulate it heavily, which is a lot of work. So that challenge, what we can do very easily in Lightroom or Photoshop or Capture One or whatever software you're using, is very time consuming in the darkroom. Also, look, with a 35 millimeter camera, you had 36 exposures, and then you had to change the roll. I mean, in the digital world, you could go through that. That's 36 exposures. By the way, I don't recommend that, though. I don't like that mentality of just keep pressing the shutter all the time. I shoot.
Spray and pray. Sure.
Yeah, spray and pray. Oh, I don't like that at all. I shoot like a film guy, which is, I know I want what I want, and if I just keep pressing the shutter, that doesn't mean I'm going to get it.
Yeah.
So I talked about a moment ago the 5 stages of photography. The first stage is visualization, which is knowing in your mind what you intend to get with that photograph. And you're shooting very mindfully, not randomly. And that's what you really had to do as a film photographer, because it was expensive, for one thing, to waste a lot of film. And you're the one that's going to have to do all the developing.
Yeah.
If you clog yourself up with a bunch of duds, bad images, you're just wasting your own time and your own money. So you really want to be thinking mindfully, which you should do as a digital photographer anyway. Visualize the photograph first. That's the first step.
Yeah, you're totally right. I just got to cut in to endorse that, because when I started, as I say, it was film time. And on top of it, I had the backpacker budget to consider. I was working in catering, which pays the bills and the next travel, but it doesn't leave that much left over for the gear and the film. So especially with wanting to get good film, not just Kodak 36, Kodak Gold or whatever, very quickly I had to think economically towards what those 36 frames were going to do. And even though I have a looser style now, very much so, in fact, it's even on my card, photographer on the loose. It's part of the whole spiel of it. I figured out my catchphrase. But basically, back in those early days, I loved how it forced me into that focus zone, so that I had to make those 36 count. Because, I mean, especially if you go for the nice slide film where you have even less latitude.
Oh,
absolutely. Exposure, that's it. But you get the luscious colors you can ask for. You have to pull up your game. And that's actually something I notice with people who have taken up digital. I mean, I think we all notice it. Just it's a no-brainer. They start with just firing away and going for 3,000 frames on a one-day trip, and it just ends up confusing things as far as I see it.
You just clog your system, and it's you have to ask yourself, is that really art when you're doing that? I think the mindfulness of what you're doing has a lot to do with you creating art rather than a snapshot. And Ansel Adams made this distinction. When you're just pressing the shutter, that's a snapshot.
Yeah.
When you're visualizing it, then it becomes art. Because what do great painters do? They don't just take, and start slapping paint on a canvas. They have something visualized. I just gave a class where we were talking about Leonardo da Vinci, and I wrote about him in my books, where he would go around with a notebook and look at people in various emotions. He said, look at them. Don't be afraid of people. Go and look at them. What do they look like when they're really mad? Their faces, what do they look like when they're sad? What do they look like when they're bored? And he would note them in his notebook. And that's our canvas as artists, is like really seeing what's out there in front of us carefully. So, it's a combination of visualizing, but also seeing what's in front of you. And if you're just doing this all the time, you're just pressing the shutter, you're not really seeing mindfully. And that can elevate your photography just instantly. If I had one, like Andy, if you said, give me a 1-minute tutorial on how to be a better photographer, that would be it. It's visualize the photograph, then press the shutter. Now that can happen in a split second, like Cartier-Bresson, or it can happen over days or hours or years even. You may even have a vision of what you want your photograph to look like, and you just haven't gotten it yet. You had to wait for the clouds to line up just the way you want and the moon to be over here, or whatever, if it's a photograph of people. But you have that idea, and then you work to make that happen. That's really where the art of photography comes in.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Yeah.
In the search of that kind of perceptive quality, excuse me, I'm a slight stutterer. Do you think it's important to go across subjects and even styles of photography? Like I do landscape, I do architecture,
I do
street photography, I do portraits. This is a mix of professional and personal. But
Yeah,
I think it's critical, and the more I go into another subject, the better I come back to the one I love or I do day to day when I have that experience of just dipping out of the water. How do you find it?
yes. I've interviewed photographers from every genre, and I find that there's always, I don't care what kind of, if you're just a landscape photographer and that's all you're interested in, you're going to find something that you're going to learn from the sports photographer. I guarantee you, even though it's a completely different world. And I think it is important to be fluid in these different genres and not just be locked into one. Now, having said that, most photographers are known for a single genre, like Annie Leibovitz. What
Yeah.
is she known for? Portraiture, especially celebrity portraiture.
Mhm.
Although, when I talked to her some time ago, she was really trying to break into landscape photography, but more for herself. But listen, Peter Hurley, what is he known for? Portraiture, but he shoots other kinds of photographs. So when you're developing your brand, I think it's important to have a, a genre that you're known for, but that doesn't mean that's the only kind of photography you're ever going to do. But I think having that cross training, it really is definitely a helpful thing.
Yeah,
Exposes
yeah.
you to different situations and how to handle them.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm glad that you also point out the professional side should be a little more focused. I certainly don't present all four of those things when people ask me what kind of photographer I am. If anything, I have to
Yeah,
listen a little bit extra because they might be looking for someone for their hotel interiors, but they might be looking for someone for their wedding. So even
it's
I'll
true.
think what I put first, even in that one sentence intro, because it's going to imprint into their brain. But I think,
True.
as you say, the cross training is definitely where it's at to develop that perceptive quality. Do you think a lot
Yeah.
of photographers, especially as they gear up into a business properly, I see the common mistake of a lot of photographers trying to do three or four types of photography when they kick open business. I assume, I mean, like myself, it's just nice to get some business, but how do you avoid that, I guess, aside from listening to smart guys like you and picking up your books?
I think you really just have to find what you're really good at, the best at, and what you're passionate about. Passion alone, by the way, I think there's a bit of a myth. Just follow your passion. It doesn't
Mm,
always work. That,
true.
that's not one of those rules that you can say, oh, just follow your passion. Everything's going to come out right. I'm sorry. It does not always pan out. You know, um, so I think in terms of from a business standpoint, let's just be really practical about it. Okay. What do you do in business? You produce something and then you market it but you're only going to produce things that are marketable. Let me rephrase that.
Mm-hmm.
You're only going to follow a business model if your product is marketable. Case in point, okay, I might really love this camera here, as a tool,
Yeah.
and it's a beautiful camera and it produces really great photographs. Is that really marketable? I mean, is there a market out there that says, hey, I want you to come and shoot with 4x5 and a vintage lens, and is that a sustainable market? I don't think it is. I mean, right?
Depending
But when
on
you
where you are in circumstances, but probably not. Yeah.
probably
The odds
not.
are small.
You've really narrowed yourself down. But if you take, say, wedding photography or landscape or architectural photography, and maybe you whittle that down to what's your specialty with that, now you're opening up a broader market, and it's also something you've gotten really good at.
Mm.
So it's kind of the crossroad of what you enjoy doing, what you're good at, and also what's marketable are those two things that are going to work in your career. And for me, interestingly enough, in video, it became doing interviews, because I had done so many interviews with photographers. The light bulb went off, and I thought, maybe I could do these interviews with other people than just photographers and get, well paid for it. And that turned out to be true. So that became my niche. That was my specialty, and it still is. Big Silicon Valley companies would hire me to interview their CEOs because I was really good at it.
I see.
So there's an example. And I enjoyed it. I really actually do enjoy talking to people just like you're doing with me. And I listen, and like you're doing, and I find that really pleasurable. And the fact that I could make it into a career was a bonus.
Yeah. There is something, we get meta on the show. It's a very loose format. We're basically so unprofessional, it's professional.
That's great.
But mate, on the meta level of interviewing people, I think there is really something interesting to holding an interview or a chat, whatever you want to call it. But essentially that one-on-one, let's get together to ask each other questions and give each other answers. It's a conversation, but it elevates it a little bit beyond a conversation when it goes well. And
you're good at it. You have the qualities. You listen and you ask questions that are appropriate, and
oh God, I hope
to
so.
give my answers. But no, you do, and that's important. Not everybody can do all those things, and some people are intimidated by it. So again, when you're good at something and you've recognized that, hey, this could be a marketable skill, or your style of photography. Like, what is it? I mean, this is something we have to figure out if we're going to market ourselves. What makes us different than the next guy out there or the next gal? That's your brand. What's different about your brand? That's really important, because if you're trying to be like everybody else, you're going to be nothing. Nobody will remember you.
And just to be clear to the audience, I get you, but I want to be clear to anyone who's just kicking off. Your brand is not your photos. Your brand is you. Would you agree with that, Mark?
It's you. Yes, it's kind of a combination of you and your work. I'd say it's the personality is another way of saying it. Like your photographs should have your own personality to them. And that's born out of you. Here's a good example. Matthew Jordan Smith, amazing celebrity photographer, wonderful person. And he talks about, you want to have your thumbprint on your photograph. You look at one of his photographs and you see him in the photograph, even though it's like Oprah Winfrey, who happens to be, she says Matthew Jordan Smith is her favorite photographer. And he has a thing that I'll never forget. He says, when you photograph people, you don't want them to just look good. You want them to feel good.
Yeah.
So part of his brand is creating a set and an environment that people are going to feel good. And that comes across in the photograph. That's part of the brand.
Yeah, I understand 1,000%. Yeah. From
Yeah.
photography world and just life in general, I worked in catering for 10 years. The places you stay aren't the ones that always make the most money. They're the ones that are the most enjoyable, especially in the slightly more alternative work mindset of catering. So
Yeah.
creatives, yeah, it's got to be a good work set as much as possible. That'd definitely fall into brand.
Exactly. And even if you're not trying to sell your work, and again, this is the fifth stage of photography. So I talked about the first, which is visualization, and the last stage is getting your work out to the world. That's
Hmm.
called sharing. And in that stage, you do want to develop your brand. You do want to develop your voice. And you're right, Andy, it is you too. It's like you think of these great photographers like Peter Hurley, that's part of his brand is Peter Hurley. It's like
Yeah. If anything,
what
he'd
you
be an
get.
excellent example. And this is all due respect to what he does, but headshots take on, by their very nature, a bit of a uniform quality to them. The studio
True.
look, the relaxed, open, hey, it's me. So then the
Yeah.
photographer's going to have to stand out a little bit more, isn't he? Or she.
Yeah. And he does that by what he does with the interaction of the person he's photographing.
Very, very beautiful.
Anybody can set up a camera and get the lights. I mean, those are skills, but okay, you can master those. But it's what he does between him and that person to put them at ease. And he has all these Hurleyisms, and little tricks that he uses to make you laugh and make you forget about the camera, and the way he can pose you. And these are all skills that he's developed. It's very important, and that's all part of his brand.
Yeah. Yeah,
Good stuff.
to me, and it actually makes me think I should have asked him when he was on the show. Uh, I wonder, in a way, is the photo for that kind of experience? I mean, the photos are obviously one of the goals, but do you think almost at that point it could be a secondary goal? Because, for example, like here in Bruges, it's this beautiful medieval city. I do part of the work is people coming in and wanting a portrait, sometimes engagements, if not a few, quite a few proposals. So the experience I try and give is obviously getting them the photos, but it's also being there, present, friendly, happy, giving them advice, giving them a couple photos of mine at the end. We use, especially for engagements, we use an Instax printer. So we can give
Oh
them
yeah,
photos directly, like right there before they even
that's
get the
cool.
email. Yeah, and to me, I mean, obviously the photos are a huge goal of it, especially a proposal or a magic moment like that. But at the end of the day, it's running in parallel with this mindset I picked up in catering of looking after people, giving them an experience, and at the end of it, they should go, "Oh, that was really great," and we got photos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I absolutely 100% agree with you. In fact, I just gave a class more or less on this same subject,
Mm.
which is I believe the mission of your photograph should be to help people.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
like in catering, what are you there for? You're helping people, right? You're creating a beautiful day or a beautiful event,
Yeah.
and you want it to be seamless. You don't want it to stand out. You want it to be like, oh, there's okay, I want another glass of champagne. You don't have to think about it. If it's done right, you almost don't notice it.
Yeah.
And I believe that's the same thing with photography. We should have a mission. What are we doing with this photograph? I'm here to help the person, to help the client for sure with their communicating their message.
Yeah.
But I believe that's true with almost any kind of photograph. It should help somebody at the end of the day. And
That's
all great artists that I'm aware of, and I've analyzed this, that's a key component in their work.
really, the
Look at
altruism really
yeah,
starts standing out consistently.
it does.
Huh.
Ansel Adams used his photography as a way to create national parks and raise awareness of why we needed to preserve our wilderness and natural places, which wasn't just in the United States, because that spread to other countries as well. But he photographed these beautiful places. And he did go to Washington and he worked, you know, to raise awareness and that sort of thing. But he used it as a vehicle to show people this beauty. Leonardo da Vinci, I mean, he captured these amazing scenes that raised people's awareness. We
Yeah.
were just analyzing his painting of the Last Supper, and I gave a class about this, and it's actually in this book here, Create, that Leonardo da Vinci said, and I mentioned that a moment ago, go out and look at these people's faces and what do they look like in anger and frustration and sadness, whatever it is. So when he was putting that painting together, he already knew what they would look like. And that's an important lesson as a photographer is don't be afraid to capture those emotions. People have all these emotions. Don't back off from any of them.
How can
Yeah.
people be afraid of that? That's my mission when I go out there. Especially street and people stuff. It's all about the emotion.
I know. Well, unfortunately, a lot of people are backed off from that. I mean, that question comes up a lot. How do you approach people? What do you do? I don't, I've done a lot of surveys and this comes up fairly frequently. And it's just getting over it. It's just learning. And this is where we learn from Peter Hurley. It's about people.
Yeah.
You know, when in street photography, you're dealing with people, you got to get used to maybe somebody's going to shake their fist at you and they don't like it. But,
But you learn.
there's ways to overcome that.
Yeah, absolutely. If nothing else, just sheer practice. That's part of how I crack through. I have my nerves
Boy,
and foibles and all that stuff. I actually lost years and years to my favorite end of the medium, which is street, because I always joke Canadians have a microchip forcing us to be friendly right about there on the neck. So,
that's true, isn't it?
privacy and just even like that's someone's private moment. Why would you
Uh
take a
huh.
photo of that, even if it's in the name of art? That whole debate raged in my head for years and years. And actually, the best antidote for that, and I've said it many times in the show, and anyone who'll give me a chance on it, just go to India for a few months where they don't care about that stuff, and you'll get over
They
it.
really don't, huh?
Yeah, so that really cracked it open for me. But I found when I came back to the West, and I'm like, oh geez, okay, we're not in Mumbai anymore, Andy. People might be a little more reserved about this. It's not that I was going up with wide angles or anything, but just breaking into their privacy. So
Yeah.
I essentially just did the sheer, you got to look past it and practice it out. Even to the point of going up to people afterwards and saying, hi, my name's Andy. I don't want to bother you. I just took your photo. I show them the photo as I say it, so it feels
That's
really wide
great.
open. And
Yeah.
I never say sorry. I always say, I hope you don't mind. So, you're
Right.
using some of those people tricks on the psychological level to sort of disarm them.
Yeah.
And even with that going on, 99% of them don't care or they love you for it. So,
People are willing. No, I notice that, when I do writing books or I'm doing a story of some sort, people really open up to that.
yeah.
And another thing you can add to that you just mentioned, and I bet you do this, is you could offer to send them the image because they
Oh,
really like that.
guaranteed. That's what business
Yeah.
cards are for.
Yeah. And then you get another, it's part of your network. But if you just, that's a good exchange for them being in your photograph. Say, hey, give me your email and I'll send you a copy.
Well, that's also where you get back to what you were talking about before about the altruism and giving something back.
Giving
I'm
something back, helping people.
Yeah,
Very
I mean,
true.
I can take something out of it and walk away, or I can make that 2 extra minutes out of my life that might even get me like an up close street portrait. I've talked about that in past. Before you give them the card, you say, "How about a photo of you?" Click,
Yeah.
click, and that side of things. I mean, that's sometimes what I get out of it more than the photo.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get a killer street shot that I'm like, okay, I got it before and even after if we got to the second shot. But more importantly, I have this whole memory and warmth of what happened there, especially if it was on holiday and some travel, some magic moments, sort of vibe in the air with that. That to me is what keeps me pushing forward on the photography more than the shots sometimes. Maybe I'm a little bit
It's
weird
really
like that.
following your interest of what you're interested in. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Well, it's a chance to connect. I mean, I mentioned I have my foibles. I grew up with ADHD. I still have it a little bit in my 40s, but it certainly leveled off and all that blah blah. But it slowed down some of the social connecting because especially, I mean, we're talking like 80s where it was still
Uh,
barely diagnosed. So never mind treatment, people aren't quite sure what to do with you with this slight extra energy and bounce that you have. So you get a little less social contact or whatever else. I mean, I coped with it. I'm sitting here as far as I can tell and not in a room or something.
Yeah. Yeah, you're doing fine.
So far, so good. The laugh still has some Joker vibes, so you never know. But I mean, for me, photography is some of that catching up on connecting with people and enjoying the social side of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
I think you're bringing up a good point too, Andy, is in our world where everything is moving very fast and faster and faster and faster and fast, instant Instagram, how much time do people really spend looking at your work in those platforms? Not much. And it's kind of geared around, right? Fast, short
get
attention unit.
get and go. Yeah.
And I'm sort of like on a campaign to reverse that, which is make prints, for instance,
Mm.
put them on the wall. People stop and look at your photographs. They look at your work. They really look at it. They don't just go flick, 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 flick. I'm guilty of that. When I'm on Instagram, I'm not spending a lot of time. Most time I'm just flicking through stuff because it's kind of designed that way,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But I think we can counteract that by sharing your work in a way that other people can really stop and soak it in. And whether it's printed on the wall or you're exhibiting your work or you're putting it in a book, things that like we talked at the beginning about, this doing this all the time. Well, we don't want to do the same thing at the very end of the photographic cycle of letting it just kind of flick by. We want to stop and really look at it and give it what it deserves, which is elevated in terms of an art form. I think that's really important.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and we're hitting all sorts of resonance here. This is something as an over 40 I've seen the world go through with this great quickening that we're on to. But I've
Yeah,
never thought of that, the spray and pray that you do on camera, but on the other end on Instagram
it's
where
the same thing.
you're
It's the
still
same
doing the
deal, right?
basic
You're still
photography.
using your finger instead of hitting the shutter. You're you're scrolling down or you're scrolling with your thumb, whatever. But
Huh.
it's the same kind of like fast food photography, is what I call it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a danger of the modern day, especially in some cultures over others. There's too much emphasis on achieving, and I mean, you could air quote some of this to an extent, achieving success. The air quote for me is just how far you want to take it. That's I've spoken about it on the show before. I won't bore you, but basically, I think you'll
Yeah,
get what I mean when I say it's part of why I moved to Europe 26 years ago. Canada is a pretty good pace of living, but 2 weeks a year is a holiday. Something's not guaranteed. Food sort
right.
of orientated towards get back to work, get your fix and get back to work instead of sit in the cafe for the extra 20 minutes. Dude, I'm happy to do my work, and especially when I'm on work, I'm almost manic. But around that, there has to be a balance of relaxing and slowing down. So,
I totally agree. That slowing down quality is such an important thing for a photographer. I make that point a lot. Sometimes I critique a lot of photographs because I have a weekly class. And in one of the things I find is probably my most common critique is this. Listen, everything was set. You had the shot beautifully framed. The lighting is great, but nothing happened. And you needed to wait until somebody walked into the frame
hmm.
or there was a moment, there was that decisive moment, something would have occurred. And maybe you have to wait an hour and stand there waiting. You know, there's nothing that says you walk into a scene, it's perfect, you press the shutter and you move on. Great photographers that I know are very patient when they're willing to come back to another, the same scene over and over until it lines up, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, that's the magic. I'm going to interview Ed Kashi on Thursday. He's a fantastic National Geographic multi award winning photographer, photojournalist, um, traveled all around the world, and he made this point about you've got to wait. You've got to allow the magic to unfold. And that's a patience point. That's looking, patience. Yeah, maybe you're pressing the shutter, but you know you haven't gotten it yet. And then all of a sudden, whoa, person walks into the frame. Let's say it's a street photograph, or there's some interaction that just comes together, or dog runs into the frame, or something happens, that makes that a meaningful photograph. Before that, it's like the table set, but there's no meal on it yet. Wait for the meal to be served.
Where's the food? Where's the meat?
There's no food. There's nothing to eat. But it's a beautiful table. It's all set, and looks beautiful and nice lighting, but there's no meal yet. So wait around for that meal.
Yeah,
it'll happen.
Yeah, I've had to throw that into a few people's lives also. I'm not getting the shots I want. Are you taking long enough? No. There's your problem.
There you go.
Do you think it also extends, because this is something I've heard as a common thread, certainly processing 2,000 guests as Photo Tour Bruges. I get absolute beginners with smartphones. I get people with large format cameras. It goes the whole gamut. It's part of why I feel so lucky with what I get to do. This has been my petri dish for the last 9 years of learning and getting to really see the nuts and bolts of our community. But I also find that a common thread is they don't get practice in. It's always, I never have time. Up and down the board.
Oh.
That's how it is. No problem. That's the universal, but they don't even get the practice time in. 4 years cold, and then they go on holiday and think that they're going to be Ansel Adams out of the box.
You can't do that. I mean, every skill, look at what it takes for sports, right? We're watching the Olympic trials, What does it take for these athletes to get to where they are? How much practice do they put in before they run a race that might take 10 seconds? Music, same thing. So one of the, I think, big misconceptions about photography is it's so easy.
Yeah.
Because it is. It looks easy because you've got one of these and you can just hold it up and press the button and you think you're a photographer. Not really. You know that you can't play a violin that easily. You can't just go and make beautiful music come out of it. You know that it's going to take a lot of work. But somehow with photography, it's gotten into this mindset of it's just really easy. And that's a misestimation of how much practice it actually does take to get good at something. And this other point about time is such a big point that I wrote a whole chapter about it in this book, Create.
Oh, you're subtle with your plugs. I like you, Mark.
Well, it's hey, look, I wrote the book for a reason.
Don't make excuses. I love it, man. It's all good. Okay. It's all good. We commend mild plugging that doesn't get annoying. It's all cool.
Oh, good. I hope I'm not annoying you.
You're not.
But listen, the point being this. I looked at the creative process and I knew that probably the biggest single excuse that's brought up is I don't have time. So I wrote a chapter about how you make time. And these are the tools you can use to actually make time. And it just debunked the idea that you don't have time. Because really, if you were to do a time diary, which is not a bad idea, you'd find there's places you're wasting time. Just get rid of those and fill it full of what you want it to be used for, which is your creative skills. That's the secret right there. It's the amount of observation that you do, the amount of photographing that you do, even research, that I mentioned, like looking at other artists and other art forms. Those things are all part of the creative process. And if you put time into it, it's gonna pay off. It's like a dividend. It's like an investment in yourself. There you go.
That makes total sense, man. Huh. I could talk to you for more. I like this. How are you for time? Do you have another 10, 15 minutes, do you think?
Yeah.
I don't stick to any time limits either on this.
Why not?
You good? All right, cool. Well then, Mark, something when I was looking you up and thinking of you towards this chit chat, I guess I mean, this is part of what I love about doing the podcast too. I get to drill people for my own interests and growth in photography. But this one is definitely for the audience, but well, definitely for the audience and also for myself because I like to consult, help people with their photography. What should people look for? What do you think the qualities are in a real masterclass level photographer? Not necessarily in success, but in effectiveness.
That is a really good question. I think what you're looking for are a couple of things. One, they have to know what they're talking about, and that can really only be demonstrated in their work. You know, um, I don't I don't believe teachers should just be people who talk about something but don't really know how to do it. I think you have to be involved in the art form,
Mm.
and the work should be it, something you recognize as professional quality. And I think it's what's also really important is they have to be able to articulate clearly and simply whatever it is they're talking about. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is confusing people by going too steep. You know, I, Andy, I started off in my teaching career as a young mountaineering instructor. And
Really?
yeah, I worked for a mountaineering school in Wyoming, and I'd gone through the school myself when I grew up kind of outdoors, and I went through a couple of different mountaineering programs. And I was a student, and then I found that they had a training program that you could go through to become an instructor, and I did that. But their program was broken down into very simple steps that you could follow, and including things like how do you prepare for a trip, a backpacking trip? What equipment should you bring, and what should you not bring? And how do you plan your day? How do you plan your food? Everything was broken down, and it was very easy to understand each separate part of it. And the guy who headed up the school was named Paul Petzold. He was an accomplished mountaineer himself. But beyond that, he was a really good teacher. So it has to be those two things. Just because somebody is a good photographer or a good artist doesn't mean at all that they're going to be a good teacher. I've seen some master classes. I'm not going to mention names, but I've seen some great artists, actors whose work I absolutely adore and admire. But
Mm.
when I heard them trying to teach, I was like, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. Because they're not teachers. They're they know their craft, but that doesn't mean they can turn around and teach somebody else. So you really have to find the combination of those 2 points. Are they good at their craft, and can they break it down into simple, easy to follow steps? And that's what I try to do when I teach. And some people are better at it than others. So find the one that you can really learn from, and actually do what they're talking about.
Yeah, I'm seeing it about the same way, man. Good at what you do and good at telling people how to do it in a nice, simple, straightforward way.
Yeah, they have to be together.
Yeah. I think you can be a genius, but you also to teach how to be a genius, you have to be able to talk like an idiot. Does that make sense?
That's a good point. I heard that Einstein was really only understood by about 12 people in the world.
Yeah.
So, you know, 12 people could understand what he was really talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if that's really the way you want to teach photography. Only 12 people can really catch on to what you're talking about. Ansel Adams wrote a series of books called the Basic Photo Series, and they're anything but really basic. They're very technical, very technical. I've read them twice, and I really have to concentrate. And I've learned a lot from those, but they didn't catch on as books, that are still living with us because they were so technical.
That's fair.
And
That's
I've
another level of intellect and discussion for the matter at hand. That point, you can't really talk like an idiot. Then you go, okay, you guys are all on this level that you're digging into this book. No holds barred. Let's go full braino.
Yeah, exactly. I
Mm.
try to hit with my books, I try to find those things that have resonated for me in my interviews or with reading Ansel Adams books, and I bring it to a level that is easy to absorb. And that, I feel, it is really the answer there. You can eventually talk about something up here, but make sure you've made it like a series of steps that get you there. You don't want to go like from here to there, because you're going to lose people. You want to make it nice, easy gradient steps that you can follow, and then eventually you're up here at this level. I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah. Well, it's a skill photographers are supposed to have. You tell a story. It can be an intellectual story, but it has to have beginning, middle, and end in a sense. And like you say, those steps and blocks that you can build on. This is sometimes my biggest danger with ADHD. Those blocks get moved around, and on a learning or a giving level, sometimes they get mushed around. Luckily now in 40s and beyond, and actually if anyone has ADHD, watch your diet and do lots of sports. It levels off to something that those blocks are a lot easier to maintain.
That's right.
Yeah, but it resonates. It resonates, man.
Walking, walking is such a therapeutic activity. And sports and getting out and using your energy. It's like, I've raised a lot of dogs, and they, puppies, they have a lot of energy.
I saw that in your bio. Is it a golden retriever? You're a dog
That's
man
right.
too.
I'm a dog man. In fact, we lost our golden retriever. She was almost 13 years old in December.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, man.
Thank you. I mean, it was very hard, but we're getting a new puppy this Sunday. It's my wife's birthday. We waited 6 months. We wanted to wait, not, just jump from one dog to another. But anyway, we found a just gorgeous little golden retriever puppy. She's going to be 8 weeks old on Sunday, and that's when you can bring them into your house. So that's going to be a whole new talk about energy and all sorts of stuff going on. But what I love about dogs is that, it forces me to go out every day, take a walk every single day. So it's probably the best thing you can do with the dog, because it's good for you. It's good for your creativity. There was a study done that walking alone can increase your creativity by 60%. Some guy wrote about it in a book. I'm not going to mention, because I don't want to do any more plugging of this book.
No, you can say.
It's in there.
I said you were doing it well, so that meant carry on.
Yeah. But you actually can, it was proven at Stanford University that people went through these tests and they found that they increased their creativity by 60%. But we need to get out. We need to take our attention, especially when we're looking at these screens all the time. Get outside, look at trees, look at rocks, take a walk, talk to somebody, take your dog, throw things for them. Very important part of your life, keeping your head together.
It's that moment where you don't even need a photo. You get the experience, like we've talked about.
Exactly. Yeah.
Dogs are good for that too, especially for us who end up dwelling on the desk now that the dark room gets dismantled.
That's right. Yeah, part of the joy of raising a dog. You never know what's going to happen, especially in the puppy stages. So we're preparing ourselves for that whole new beginning.
Yeah. Well, it's excuse me. It's like you say, it's energy coming into the house. And I guess, mate, this also brings me to something on your bio that you mentioned, that you, like me, feel such a drive about helping photographers, teaching photographers, whatever you want to call it. I call it photo buddy at times. How does that energy feel? Can you find some words for me to say the great Marc Silver really got it right by teaching people on photography is?
Well, here's the secret. And I just talked about it in a class. The best way to learn is to teach. And when you're a teacher, you have this total side benefit, which is you really have to learn whatever it is you're talking about. And it really does help you learn it. It's really funny. I'm sure you've had this happen, Andy. You read something and you haven't sort of integrated it yet into your thought process, but you know it's an important point.
Mm.
But the minute you start teaching it to someone else, it starts to have more meaning for you too.
Absolutely.
And so, and you can see also what's happening to the other person as you're teaching them. You can see it sort of taking form. But by the same token, you really have to also look at yourself and go, do I really understand what I'm talking about? Because there's nothing worse than committing yourself to a video or a book or something, and you don't really know what, you don't really have your act together, and that you know it and you feel it, and it's like, that's not good.
Yeah. Another
So you got
word
to
for it
stop
is
and make sure you really
decency.
do understand what you're talking about.
Sorry, I cut you off there, but I think
Yeah,
another
sorry.
word for it is at least decency, knowing what you're talking
Yeah,
about, especially if
that's
people
being polite about it,
yeah,
because
just
otherwise you're just BSing, and it's like, that's not, there's a lot of BS out there on the internet. Let's face it, a lot of stuff that's being slung around that really is of no value and no use. And that's not a good teacher. You know who's a good teacher is Scott Kelby. I don't know if
Scott is
you're
a friend of the show. I had him on for a two-parter.
oh, he's
Yeah, I
great.
like
He's a
Mr.
good friend
Kelby
of
quite
mine.
a lot.
I've been on his show 4 or 5 times, and he's just such a, talk about decency. He's just a really kind person and very generous. And there's an example of a good teacher. He knows what he's doing, and he knows how to talk about it, and he knows how to break it down into simple steps. And he's fun. That's the other thing. He makes it fun. Those are good qualities all rolled together.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad that came up because that I even forgot it. I think that's something also a good quality of a teacher is having fun with it. Because you are going to get to points where you're not talking on the simple level. You're going
Yeah,
deep and dirty, and I think if you can't crack a joke or just have 1 second of levity between all this,
totally.
it's not going to settle as well. I make it a point during my photo tours, unless obviously I read the guest as just I'm really here to shoot it out, to spend a good quarter of the tour not talking about photography. Where are you from? Are you enjoying Bruges? Do you need some ideas for
Yeah,
gear and all that sort of thing? You gotta break it up and give their brain, if nothing else, give their brain a moment to digest all this hardcore information. Uh,
totally.
yeah, yeah,
The
fun.
people skills, the human side of the whole thing. Because at the end of the day, we're photographers. And what's a photographer? A person. And, what goes on behind the camera turns out to be the most important asset that you have.
Yeah,
What goes on over here, not what goes on over here with the camera. And knowing those skills, and also what's going on at the other side of the camera with the person you're photographing, those skills are what we're talking about. Those are really important skills that can make or break a photograph for sure.
absolutely, man. Or a
No doubt about it.
photographer if we're talking about the instruction side of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Mark, I enjoyed this, and we might very well put you on the "You are welcome back anytime" list. I quite enjoyed this today,
Okay.
man. Before you
Happy
get
to
out
come
of here,
back.
though, we have a little more business to conclude. I have to ask you the question that I've asked each and every one of my guests as Photo Tour Bruges, each and every one of my guests here on That Photo Feeling. Mr. Marc Silber, how do you feel about your photography?
That's it's funny you asked me that because I had to put together a collection. I was asked just recently by our marketing guys, Mark, I need tons of your photographs. I need a whole bunch of them. And so I had to dive back into Lightroom and go through all my catalogs. And you know what, Andy? I found that I was much more appreciative of my own work than I've been in a long time. It's a
Mhm.
funny thing because I think as photographers, a lot of times we're maybe not satisfied with our own work, or we compare ourselves unfavorably to other people. And I had that pleasant experience of going, Mark, you're not a bad photographer. You're, I like your work, turns out. And I think that's a good thing. And I found that, especially work that I hadn't looked at in a long time, I thought, wow, there's some photographs I haven't even dug out of this bin, from Italy or from Morocco. And I hadn't looked at it in a long time. And there's some pretty cool stuff in there. So that's how I feel. I feel like I kind of rediscovered myself and had a new appreciation of my own work, which I think is a good thing. I think it's a healthy thing.
Oh, that's wonderful, man. If it wasn't the end of the show, I'd ask you 20 questions about that.
Okay.
Thank you for that. And Mark, before we do the proper thank you and goodbye, please let people know without any restraint, plug away. Where can we find you?
Okay. Well, I wrote a book called Advancing Your Photography. I'm terrible at marketing. I should have it right in my hand, but it's essentially my basic handbook of photography. And you can get it. Actually, I give the book away. You cover the shipping and the handling, and we'll send it to you. And it's the URL for that, and you'll probably put it in the show notes, I imagine. It's advancingyourphotography.com. And I noticed we just had a memory card thing. I don't know if
Oh
you.
yeah, my battery's running low, but don't worry about it.
Oh,
We're all
okay.
recording. It's all good.
Okay, cool. So advancingyourphotography.com, you can get that book, and you can actually get my other two books at a big discount. So that's a good URL to go to. And you can find me on Instagram, Marc Silver. If you know how to spell my name, MarCsilber, you'll find me on Instagram. You'll find me on YouTube. And my website is silberstudios.com. And that's pretty much where you're going to find everything about Marc Silver in one of those places. And I'd love to have you guys check in. And oftentimes I hear from people who see me on a podcast and, go ahead and shoot me an email. We'll have a discussion. I actually enjoy that a lot.
Good, man. And I'll make sure to link all that in the description. So you are
Cool.
covered there. We did lose the video on my side of things, but we might get it back for the very last of it. There we go. And that's perfect because I can say face to face, eye to eye. Thanks so much, Mark, for dropping by that photo feeling. Really appreciate it, man.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Andy.
Excellent. All right, dear photo friends, there we have it. A nice long chat with Marc Silver, and I think a very good one, no less. Please check out his work. You can find links in the description if him rattling it off at the end of the chat wasn't enough. And feel free, of course, to check out my own work just to slide that in. Not to mention, of course, liking, sharing, subscribing, especially if you enjoy this podcast through iTunes, through Spotify, through whatever podcast network. And it even goes beyond that because, of course, this video version is up on youtube.com/Andy McPhoto. All right, plugs out of the way. The quick catch up with Andy is that, as I said at the top of the show, my eye has been a little bit off the ball as far as the podcast goes. So apologies for that. Last episode we talked about how Andy was busy and also how, let's just be honest, because you can hear it on the record last episode, I haven't been in the greatest of moods. Some of the blues with Photo Tour Bruges business diving down to 20% of usual at best has not been super great for my photo soul, to be honest. And I know some of you would say dive yourself into the podcast, dive yourself into the live stream, also called That Photo Feeling and linked in the description, and dive yourself into your photo work. And friends, I've done that on the last side of things with the photography. I mean, I took some breaks and chilled out and also enjoyed my life, which frankly was not totally overdue, but not totally underdue either. And now we seem to be back in a fairly steady, constant way. I've done the last of the cleansing of the mind, body, and soul as far as sorting my shit out, to be quite frank, and pardon my French. So next week, we will have another episode of interview with the boys from Camera Shake podcast. Oh, yeah. Stay tuned for that. I don't know what to tell you beyond that. I'm keeping busy with these fall colors, taking photos and doing my thing. I've also had the Fujifilm XS10 for the last week in my hands as I start thinking about retiring the Fujifilm X-T2 that I call my workhorse on that particular system. Because of course I shoot Nikon too for my full frame needs. You longtime listeners will know. And Yeah, it's fun. It's great. The XS10 is a very interesting camera. I thank my Photoshop Photo Co de Nice as well as Fujifilm Belgium for arranging that I could have some time with it as they have in the past, and I am so, so grateful for. I think you all know that budget is one of my biggest limits in photography. And the camera itself is pretty interesting. It's not quite an XT series model, but then again, it isn't priced nor advertised like that. And actually on my YouTube channel over at youtube.com/AndyMcPhoto, you will soon see a review of that, as well as a visit to Photo Days, a local trade show that happens here for the photographers here in Belgium on the yearly basis, but not so much over COVID as in not last year. But with the return of it this year, I made the effort. I filmed some video. I talked to friend of the show and future return guest Frank Doorhoff for a quick little interview catch-up. And things are afoot, my friends. You'll hear more about it on next episode when I talk to the boys from the Camera Shake podcast. So that's a bit of an all-over-the-place catch-up, but I hope it helps, as well as a teaser to what's coming up next episode. I promise, too, that by next Thursday you will have an episode. Again, apologies for any delays and that sort of thing, but as you hear, just between the photo trade shows and the time with the Fujifilm XS10, as well as the fall colors in Bruges, I got things to do. And unfortunately, this podcast is not my highest priority, much as I would love it to be, because what kind of photographer would I be if I was just talking about taking photos instead of doing it? Huh? All right, that's it, that's all. I'm Andy McSweeney of Andy McSweeney Photography, Photo Tour Bruges, and That Photo Feeling, both the podcast and live stream over at youtube.com/AndyMcPhoto. See you in the next week, and take care of yourself. It is cold weather, and there are still cold times with the whole sanity of the last 18 months and the situation thereof. Cough, cough, COVID, COVID. So look after yourselves, look after each other, and you know what to do from here. Get out there and get shooting.